the mirror that reflects death, the dark inheritance. Lucas walked slowly down the dusty hallway of the old house he now called home. The silence felt heavier than usual, as if the walls had absorbed decades of forgotten stories, whispering secrets only to those willing to listen. He wasn't. The house had belonged to a distant relative, someone he barely remembered. After his wife's death, he accepted the inheritance without a second thought. Any place far from the suffocating memories that surrounded him seemed better. The pain was still a constant in his life, and he believed that isolation in this old house would be the refuge he needed. As he explored the house, Lucas climbed the wooden stairs leading to the attic. The smell of mold filled his nostrils, and the faint light from the dusty window barely illuminated the space. It was there that he saw it for the first time. An antique mirror, leaning against a wall. The wooden frame was intricately carved, and its surface reflected a dull light, almost as if something was hidden beneath the glass. For some reason, Lucas hesitated. Something about the mirror unsettled him. He stepped closer, and his own image stared back, distorted by the shadows around. The mirror seemed out of place, as if it didn't belong in that attic, that house, or that time. Taking a deep breath, Lucas turned away, feeling an inexplicable chill run down his spine. He returned downstairs, trying to push the unsettling thought aside, but the mirror seemed to linger in his mind, like an unwelcome presence that refused to leave. The macabre reflection. The days passed slowly in the old house. Lucas spent most of his time wandering from room to room, trying to find some peace in solitude. However, something constantly bothered him: the mirror in the attic. No matter how hard he tried to avoid thinking about it, he felt inexplicably drawn there. One afternoon, unable to resist the urge, Lucas climbed the stairs once again. The attic was as dark and silent as before. The mirror seemed to be waiting for him, standing in the same spot, but now, under the soft light of the sunset, there was something different about it. The frame appeared even more detailed, almost alive. With a resigned sigh, Lucas approached. He looked into the reflection, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. It was just him, with a tired face and deep, dark circles, clear signs of sleepless nights. However, as his eyes explored the surface of the mirror, something changed. He blinked, and suddenly, the image he saw was no longer his own. In the reflection, Lucas was lying in a coffin, pale and motionless. Around him, people dressed in black wept silently. His face was inert, lifeless, as if his very soul had left his body. It was a funeral. His funeral. Lucas stumbled back abruptly, his heart racing in his chest. He blinked again, and the vision vanished, leaving only his ordinary image in the mirror. Shock overwhelmed him. I must be going crazy, he thought, desperately trying to find a logical explanation for what he had just seen. He hurried down from the attic, trying to shake off the suffocating feeling that something much darker was lurking nearby. Persistent visions. In the days that followed, Lucas tried to avoid the attic at all costs. He kept himself busy with simple tasks, like organizing the old furniture in the house or reading books that failed to hold his attention. However, his mind always returned to the mirror. The images he had seen that day replayed in his head like an endless echo. He tried to convince himself it had been just an illusion, a product of stress, but something inside him knew it was more than that. One night, after hours of restlessness in bed, he could no longer resist. He got up, feeling an almost irresistible force pulling him back to the attic. His feet moved on their own, as if they knew the way. When he opened the creaking attic door, there stood the mirror, shrouded in shadows and mystery. Lucas approached once more, his heart racing. He looked into the reflection, expecting to see only his tired image. But as before, the vision changed. This time, he saw something even more detailed. The same mourners surrounded his body, but now he recognized some of them, friends, distant relatives all present at his funeral. The coffin appeared more vivid, the flowers wilted, emitting a scent of decay. Each time Lucas looked into the mirror, the details became clearer. He saw people holding his cold hands and murmuring words of farewell. The visions felt so real that he could almost hear the sad whispers around him. Even frightened, Lucas couldn't stop looking. It was as if the mirror was revealing the truth, an inevitable truth that awaited him. But what could he do? Escape seemed impossible. Growing anxiety. Lucas could no longer ignore the mirror. He tried to distract himself, but the image of his own funeral haunted him in every moment of silence. Fear began to dominate his thoughts, and he found himself constantly glancing over his shoulder, as if death were watching him. His nightmares, always disturbing, were now filled with the same scenes the mirror had shown him. Himself in a coffin, surrounded by familiar faces, mourning his departure. As the days passed, Lucas became a prisoner of his own mind. He couldn't leave the house, as if an invisible force kept him trapped there. The fear of dying at any moment seeped into every part of his life. His heartbeats, once imperceptible, now felt like a constant drum in his ears, and every minor physical discomfort set off alarms. Was his body beginning to fail? Just as the mirror had shown, nights were the worst. Lucas lay in bed, unable to sleep. He tossed and turned, feeling the weight of anguish grow. Even with his eyes closed, the vision of the mirror hovered over him. He saw himself lying lifeless, hands crossed over his chest, in a morbid, final pose. When he finally fell asleep, the dreams brought distorted versions of his death. He would wake up sweating, heart racing, sensing that something terrible was about to happen. He tried to convince himself that it was all just hallucinations brought on by grief, but a part of him knew that something much deeper was at play. The mirror was not just an antique. It was a window to the inevitable, the revelation of fate. Lucas could no longer distinguish between reality and imagination. The visions, nightmares, and the mirror filled his mind completely. He felt on the verge of a breakdown, yet at the same time an unbearable curiosity grew within him. He needed to look in the mirror again. He needed to understand what it was truly showing. That night, after yet another failed attempt to sleep, Lucas climbed the stairs to the attic, his heart racing. The mirror awaited him, as always, but this time it seemed darker, more threatening. Trembling with fear and anxiety, Lucas stood in front of the mirror, his reflection slowly appearing as he approached. For a moment, everything seemed normal. He looked at his own image, hollow eyes, and a pale face. But then, as before, the vision changed. This time, however, what he saw made his blood run cold. He was no longer just lying in a coffin. He saw himself collapsing to the floor, hand clutching his chest, face contorted in pain. His body trembled violently as his heart failed, and then darkness enveloped him. Lucas recoiled, fear consuming every fiber of his being. The death he had seen was not just a possibility, it was a certainty. The mirror had revealed the cause, an imminent heart attack. Panic overtook him. What could he do? How could he escape something that seemed so inevitable? He spent the rest of the night pacing the house, trying to think of a solution. Maybe if he left the house. But what if the mirror followed him? What if the fate he had seen was inescapable, no matter where he went? Each thought led him back to the same conclusion. Death was approaching, and he had no way to stop it. As the hours passed, the feeling of helplessness suffocated him. Each heartbeat felt like a countdown, each breath a step closer to the end he had witnessed in the mirror. Lucas's mind wavered between despair and a faint hope of finding a way out. But deep down, he knew the mirror had shown him the truth. Death already had him in its grasp. The final confrontation. Lucas could no longer bear the pressure. With every passing minute, the certainty of his imminent death crushed his sanity. He felt cornered, like an animal caught in a trap with no escape. Each heartbeat sounded like a warning, each pain in his chest a portent of the end the mirror had revealed. Desperate, he climbed the stairs to the attic once more. The mirror awaited him, sinister, as if it knew it was about to fulfill its final role. Lucas stood in front of it, staring at his reflection with anger. The fear that had once consumed him had now transformed into rage. He would not let the mirror control his fate. "This ends now," he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty walls of the attic. Without a second thought, Lucas grabbed an old chair leaning against the wall and, with all his strength, hurled it at the mirror. The sound of shattering glass was like an explosion, and the mirror shattered into 1,000 fragments that scattered across the floor in a sparkling rain. For a brief moment, Lucas felt relief. The mirror was destroyed, the vision shattered, but then relief gave way to something much more terrifying. A sharp, unbearable pain pierced his chest. He staggered, instinctively clutching his heart, just as he had seen in the reflection. His knees buckled, and he fell heavily to the ground among the mirror fragments. The world around him began to fade, and Lucas realized, with a chilling clarity, that the mirror had not lied. He was dying, just as the mirror had shown. And then darkness consumed him, the echo of death. The attic remained in absolute silence after Lucas's body fell. The fragments of the mirror shimmered in the dim light, streaming through the dusty window, each piece reflecting the scene of a fallen man, lifeless. The air was thick, as if the very space mourned the tragedy that had unfolded there. Lucas's body lay on the floor, his lifeless eyes staring into the void. The last beats of his heart echoed like a lament, a whisper of what had been. But somehow, strangely, the mirror continued to exist, even in pieces. Each fragment seemed to pulse, a dark energy emanating from them, as if Lucas's essence was now intertwined with the intricately carved wood and broken glass. Sometime later, new residents moved into the house. A young couple, seeking a fresh start, explored the dusty rooms. In the attic, they discovered the fragments of the shattered mirror, and upon looking at them, they were immediately drawn to the peculiar beauty of the frames. Unaware of the tragic past that surrounded them, they decided to take a few pieces to decorate their living room. However, as the days passed, strange things began to happen. The couple started to feel a presence in the atmosphere, as if something were watching them. At night, they woke to the sound of whispers, and when they gazed into the mirror fragments, they were confronted with visions of people crying at a funeral. They caught glimpses of a pale, motionless man lying down. One night, while observing one of the pieces, the young woman saw Lucas's reflection in a coffin, surrounded by unknown yet familiar faces. Panic overtook her, and she screamed, calling for her partner. Together they began to research the history of the house and uncovered the tragedy of Lucas, a man consumed by a dark fate. As the truth unfolded, the mirror, even in fragments, continued to retain the pain and sorrow of its last vision. Thus, the cycle of horror perpetuated, and the house remained a home for those seeking to escape life, only to be reminded of the inevitability of death. The echo of Lucas's death would continue to resonate, a dark warning for all who dared to look.